What's up, guys? Welcome back to Sets and Reps. We still out here, episode number 13. You can find my show every other Wednesday out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, basically everywhere that you can see and listen to a podcast, wherever your heart desires. YouTube as well. We got the video version up on there. Listen, are you an athlete that's interested in up-leveling your performance? Are you a trainer or a coach that's interested in preemptively striking at some of the things that your athletes need in order to prevent injuries? Or are you just any normal person that wants to learn how to walk, crawl, and run the way that nature intended? Let me introduce you to GOATA. I had the opportunity to sit down with Coach Stephen Beahn, who is a GOATA coach. GOATA stands for Greatest of All Time Athlete Actions. And basically, the short of it is that it's taking a look at all of the athletes who play a certain way for their entire career without getting injured. So we're going to take a deep dive into what that means, what is required for it, some of the different postural assessments that need to be done, how you can assess an athlete and start to train them in this way. We're going to talk about the difference between front chain dominance and back chain dominance and what it means for performance and for exercise, the difference between the lifting engine and the locomotion engine when you're running and when you are lifting weights, how to properly absorb pressure with your foot and ankle when you're running, and how to translate energy from one body part to the other. We are going to talk about the nature of movement and looking at indigenous tribes and animals and even babies when they crawl for the first time. I'm going to leave time codes in the description so you can hop around to all these interesting and exciting topics at your own leisure. Before we get into the episode, we're going to do this week's segment of circuit training. Today, we're going to talk about tight hips. What does it mean when someone says they have tight hips? Well, we have different muscles in our body that are responsible for flexion, which is bringing your knee up into the air, extension, which is making your leg nice and straight and pushing your leg back behind you. We have abduction, which is kicking your leg out to the side, adduction, which is bringing your leg in towards you, and internal and external rotation, which is when the movement of your hip causes your knee to go in towards your body and then out towards your body. So all these movements are vital to properly explore this amazing world that we have, to walk, to run, to move around. When these muscles become tight, which means that they're in a constant shortened state, you are not going to be functioning as well as you'd like to and as well as your body intended. You're going to have pain. You're going to have dysfunction. You're going to have loss of proper movement. What to do about it? Well, there's various different ways to stretch and improve that mobility, to get those muscles in a loosened state so that you can work on building your strength again. So the best way to do this is with the following stretches. So I put together for you my favorite pre-workout hip mobility routine. We're going to start with the 90-90 hip rotation. You're going to start by sitting with your legs in a split stance. Your front knee is going to be at 90 degrees. You're going to just take a look and make sure that your knee is bent in a perfect square, and your back leg is going to be bent at 90 degrees. What you're going to do with your legs both flat on the ground, you're going to keep your feet planted. You're going to lift those knees up one at a time, rotate, twisting your torso, keeping your body up nice and straight so that you land with the exact same position mirrored on the opposite side. And I would like you to do that for one set of 8 times, back and forth, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 8. The next thing you're going to do is what I like to call the great hip stretch. And this is one of my favorites from Dr. Aaron Horschig of Squat University. You're going to start in a lunge position with your front knee bent. Let's say you're going on the left leg first. So that left leg is going to be bent. Your right leg is going to be extended straight back behind you. You're going to take both of your hands, place them down in front of you with your left hand inside of your left foot. Then keeping your right hand on the ground, you're then going to twist your torso without moving your hips at all, keeping everything lined up. But the only part's moving is your torso. You're going to twist and then extend that left arm behind you so that your left and right arm almost make a T position. And you're going to rotate back and forth like that for one set of 8 times. And you're going to do that on each leg, switching positions, mirroring it exactly on this side. And the final thing that you're going to do is what we like to call the cat-camel hip rotations. If you're a fan of yoga, if you're a fan of fitness in general, you might have seen these. What you're going to do is get into a quadruped position on your hands and knees. And you're basically going to start by getting into the camel position by bringing your belly button into your spine, curving, making a nice curve in your upper back and your low back, bringing your head down, toward the ground. So you get a nice stretch in your back, but also you get those hips moving, right? You get your pelvis tilting and back and forth, which is what creates our hip motion. And then you're going to go into the cat position by dropping the belly button to the floor and curving the lower back, making a nice bowl shape and tilting your head up to the sky, getting a nice neck stretch. Without any further ado, thank you for listening to this week's segment of Circuit Training. Let's get right into this episode. We have Stephen Beahn, aka Coach Beahn. How you doing, man? How's your day going?
Doing well. It's going well. I appreciate the opportunity.
Good. Yeah. Really glad to be here. I was thinking back on our first interaction somewhere close to like 2 months ago. I had been following NESP. Shout out to them in Lowell. Really great energy, really great community of athletes. It seems like they've created, and I've been following them for a while. And I seen you pop up on their page with this talk of GOATA, which is a really great concept that was new to me, completely new. You came out with these acronyms and these pictures of athletes in all these dynamic poses with lines, and me being a visual learner, I was very intrigued by that, and I'm like, I got to figure out what this is. And that led me to kind of reaching out and trying to make the connect with you. And I'm just fast forward, 2 months, here we are, where we're on the podcast together. So once again, thanks for coming and helping me take my show to a new direction. So
absolutely. Yeah, no, shout out to Joe. Like you said, NESP is a great gym. He does a great job with all those athletes. And I was blessed to be able to get in there and kind of spread the light of GOATA. And he was one of the first people that was susceptible to it. I mean, he's got an open mind, and he saw the value where it kind of helped basically up level the training that he already had going on. And so he saw the value. He said, yeah, come on in, be a good addition to the gym. I mean, I'd spoken to a few different gym owners, and they kind of gave me the kick rock spiel, and I landed in NESP, and like I said, I'm blessed that Joe was able to let me in there and do my thing.
Yeah, you mentioned up level. I like that term because I feel like this is a concept that's going to be pretty game changing, not only for the people who are immediately going to be affected, like by sports performance training in particular, but by the fitness industry in general. I mean, it's a fairly new, seems like it's a new methodology. So what I'm hoping is that, my listeners, myself especially, but also my listeners are going to be able to learn a lot. And if there's any performance coaches out there listening, this is something that's really I feel like it's going to take the world by storm. So I'm excited to hear what you got to say and just dive right on into it. But in talking about your connection with NESP, I thought it would be a good idea to start off with having you just tell me a little bit about your background, especially the steps that led you to where you're at now. So we'll kind of start there. And then I definitely do want to kind of dive into what GOATA actually is. All right. Sure. So let's take it away, Coach Beahn.
Yeah. I appreciate it. So, I mean, lifetime athlete, I mean, as so many people are, and obviously I never experienced a catastrophic non-contact or a serious catastrophic injury. However, I was dealing with repetitive stress injuries, the hips, the groins, hamstrings once in a while. I was always in the gym. I never really understood why my body felt like, not that it was breaking down, but I definitely had I took it upon like the meathead way of just kind of getting in the gym, hammering weights, and you see a increase in athletic performance and capability as far as you get bigger, you get a little bit faster, you get twitchier muscles maybe, and from there I mean, this is going back 10, 15 years, and so from there obviously I had no idea what was going on in my own body, so I was just trying to learn. I was always trying to learn new ways to work out, to kind of increase the athleticism side of strength and performance. So, fast forward, I played college football at Framingham State, still dealing with turf toe here and there, the repetitive stress of the hip flexors, groin, stuff like that. And it actually got to the point where I was getting wrapped up. I was having my groin wrapped. I was obviously the ankles and stuff. All the athletes get their ankles taped, but I had an ankle injury my senior year that sidelined me for the last game of what would have been the last game of my career, and or what was actually, and it didn't really heal fully. Like, I went through PT. I had a couple pro days post senior year season, and it never fully healed. I still never got back to 100%, which drove me crazy. As an athlete, not being able to perform at your peak potential, it's heartbreaking. It's a mental thing. So, you know what I mean? Yeah. You're going crazy, kicking yourself. And it kind of just pushed me on that path of, like, over the last few years, I've been really, really digging deep into essentially health overall, but mostly on the physical performance side of things. So I always been trying to find that next step up. And about a year and a half ago, I came across a guy, like you said, I was on Instagram, I was scrolling through, and I saw a guy breaking down film and drawing lines, drawing arrows, stuff like that, talking about these things that I had never heard before, like the foot placement, we'll get into it in a little bit, but essentially breaking down some stuff that was news to me. Right. And so, being someone that's always looking to learn, like I know we've spoken before, like you're always looking to try and become your best self so that you can help your athletes the same way, which is what I'm doing now. So just that alone kind of drove me to get into that. But it was stuff that resonated with me, because as much as I did pay attention to what was going on in my body, I was always, I had the awareness of my body. It's not like I was just kind of like working out. Like, I knew what I was doing when I was doing it, because I put so much time into learning it. But the GOATA system as a whole, I think resonated the most, because of the fact that there was no, I created the best next thing, or the next best thing. I brought this, and like, this is what's going to help you become the best. It was credited to a natural form of movement. And I know a lot of times, like, we hear the terms like functional movements, functional patterns, stuff like that. But this wasn't even that type of system. It was literally like, no, like, we observe nature, and me kind of being a nature boy myself, my whole life kind of was drawn to that. So again, fast forward some time, and I started to really dive deep into GOATA. And at this time, I had graduated college. I sat at a desk for about a year and a half. And so I'm like, my whole life has been so locked into physical capability. And I'm sitting at a desk, I can feel myself. I'm still young, so I can feel myself. Like, I'm like, damn, like I'm really going crazy. Like, This is what people talk about, like sitting in a cubicle, like not being outside, not walking around too much. And I actually started to feel my body, like, within the first few months. I mean, going from working out a couple times a day, sometimes every day of the week, to still working out, but then leaving the gym at lunch and going back and sitting at the desk for another 4 or 5 hours a day. So I was feeling my body make those changes. I was like, something's weird about, like, the way my body feels sitting in a complete, like, a stagnant position. So mind you, I'm looking at GOATA and trying to figure out what GOATA is, because obviously I'm sure, like yourself, like, you're not going to fully dive deep into something or invest yourself into something that you haven't fully seen and been convinced that it's something that is of major value. And so once that came across, I crossed that line where I was like, wow, these guys are onto something. So and I guess that'll lead me to get into GOATA itself, and which is, it's an acronym for the greatest of all time athletes, greatest of all time actions, which is again, it's just that. So it's the actions of the greatest of all time athletes. And by that, we mean like multi-decade super athletes, guys that played into their 30s, 40s, 50s and don't get hurt. They're super durable. And that was one of the major things that caught my eye. And I was like, all right, so if they're just talking about all these guys that like Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, Ed Reed, you know, guys that played and had successful careers with, you know, minimal injuries, you know, or non-contact mostly, but some even light contact. It's all relevant. And from there, it caught my eye. So they're talking about, you know, the infants moving the same as a guy like Ed Reed. And I'm like, okay, well, like that it went over my head at first, and I was like, oh, that's kind of weird, but you know, I'll let it slide and then keep it going. And then all of a sudden they're talking about indigenous tribes, and then so I'm like, okay, well, yeah, cool, like durable people, the most durable on the planet. You know, you can't really get hurt when you're a hunter gatherer and having to supply your family with food and resources that way. So it's a few months into me studying GOATA, and I'm like, all right, like this is really interesting now. It's growing on me more and more every day. So I guess from there, it just led me to go down that rabbit hole. And then they started talking about the Fibonacci sequence, like the golden ratio, stuff like that. And I'm like, well, like, all right, this is like, it's like almost too wide avenue. I don't know,
like
for lack of better words,
exercise philosophy.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. Exercise philosophy. And so I'm sitting there looking at it, and I'm like, all right, well, like they're putting up clips, like you said, they're putting up clips of a baby that's, you know, 3 or 5 weeks old crawling, and then they're putting up a guy running on a treadmill, and it's the same movement patterns. It's relays back to the slow motion video that we're always talking about, and it really is the proof is in the slow motion video evidence. So for me, coming from a time where I'm watching YouTube videos, I'm following everyone and their mother on Instagram, trying to find all these accounts that would help me just kind of get some cool workouts in. Like it's the stuff I think that could kind of challenge myself. I took the deep dive, and once I started seeing the actual slow motion video and not, you know, too many of the research papers and the articles and stuff like that, that was where GOATA set themselves apart. Because again, we'll get into it as it goes, but so from there, I was convinced that there was something behind it, I guess is what I should say. And then I started to kind of implement, you know, the strategies and patterns that they've seen, which is the inside ankle bone high and heel away, heel flip on the release of the gait pattern. And so that's something I had never really studied before, is because not too many people were actually kind of approaching it that way, as like, all right, well, like, what's the number one thing we do as humans is probably walk around from place to place and locomote in that forward sense. And so that was kind of really what struck my eye. And meanwhile, I'm sitting at a desk with my phone in my hand, watching gait patterns of how people move and how these super durable people, and I'm feeling myself. I'm like, dude, I'm in my mid-20s and I'm getting back pain and stuff already. Like it was pretty interesting. And so it kind of just led me on that wild goose chase of finding, you know, how to correct all of the things that I had experienced in my athletic career, where no one was able to do that for me or with me or kind of guide me through that. So from there, I just kind of took that leap and went into it full head on.
Nice, man. You mentioned there's a lot of slow motion footage. Do you feel that that's the best way to assess these patterns, is by seeing what the pattern that's there movement wise is by recording footage versus looking at an image?
I would say absolutely, just only because the naked eye will fool you. You know what I mean? Like you could watch something in person at obviously full speed, and then you could record it and watch it at full speed. But Coach Gill, GOATA Local on Instagram, and GLS training as well, Gary, down in New Orleans, Coach Gill had spent a lifetime of being in pain and kind of the same thing, only he had some more serious issues of as far as injuries and whatnot. So he, I think it was 2009 or something when the iPad finally came out. I mean, mind you, this has been 20 years. He's been cutting film off of like camcorder stuff. He'll play the games of like the 90s in the NBA games and kind of record it on the TV and then go chop the film and then put it on a disc, then get it on a computer and start assessing the slow motion essentially. And so this is like early 2000s, and he's doing that which is a lot longer process than just clicking a button to screen record and then moving it to somewhere that you can kind of watch that slow motion. But,
thankful for the advancements that we got.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's incredible what technology has done for us, and it's also incredible how poorly, or how negatively it affects us as well. You know what I mean? We got all the texture necks, the slouched shoulders, so it's like you win some, you lose some. You got to take what you get and make the best of it. Absolutely. And so the slow motion video is like, I mean, like you were saying, like watching a still frame, depending on the angle of the frame, like we watch from an anterior head-on clip or head-on view of who we assess and what we do, because we're looking at, landmarks on the body, where the foot placement is, where the inside ankle bone high or low is just inside ankle bone higher than the outside ankle bone, and what that does is gives the room for that ankle joint and swivel joint to actually function properly. So when you're looking at a still frame, it like I said, it depends on where that person is, either in the gait pattern or the squat rep or what have you, to know really where the issues lie. And so with that, I think the benefit is definitely with the slow motion. And so, when that iPad came out in 2009 or 2010 or something, it kind of changed the game.
So what are the most common things that you find, deviations, if you will, posturally, when it comes to ankle positioning or foot positioning, knees and hips? In general, what are some things that you find with athletes that you've worked with?
A lot of them, simply, it depends on how they were training before, but also like it could be something as simple as like the way they sat as a toddler, as a kid growing up. So, if you're constantly sitting, like these kids are playing video games, if they're laying on a couch, they're slouched over. They could be sitting in like a W sit, kind of with their toes pointed out and their heels pointed in, which is going to change everything about your body structure. When we're born, I think there's like 270 bones in the body because of all the growth plate fusions that actually happen within early life stage of the life through the adolescent into the adult period in lifetime, where we're obviously fully grown and kind of built up to fuse to one another. So there's so many joints and so many ways that body could change, and essentially like a newborn baby is practically rubber, so going up through 5, 10, 12 years old, where they're early in that growth plate stage, it's crucial to kind of have a structure that's sound with the function of how we are built, how we're designed.
Or else you're going to get duck feet like me. Like I'm just looking out at my feet right now and they're in that W that you were mentioning.
That's actually a thing too, is like, like we're driving all the time. We're sitting in chairs, we're sitting on couches. And so from there, it's like when you sit down, what does your pelvis do? It kind of tucks underneath you. When you're relaxed and kind of lay back in the couch, your spine bends as where, it's like, again, these are things in Western society that's so normal, and it's become the comfort lifestyle or the sedentary lifestyle, the desks, stuff like that.
People don't, unfortunately, people don't pay attention to that stuff. And it's so vital if they want to improve their pain that they always complain about. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Absolutely. And so it's like, it's tough because a lot of these people are going to the chiropractor and like they have the potential to really soar through the roof with their human optimization as far as the functionality goes. And they're kind of not getting what they deserve or what they are capable of. So it's tough, which is why, you know, GOATA is, you know, the motto is saving the world's connective tissue. And it does do that. It's just people gotta buy in and really see the value in it. And again, that's one of the things is where they're like, oh, well, there's no research on it. There are articles that support the evidence of what we are seeing on the film. It's like we don't have time. Like a good metaphor is like the first indigenous person or back a couple 100, 300, 400 years ago or before that, you know, the first person to get bit by a poisonous snake. Like, are they going to do the paperwork to let the other tribe members know that to not touch that snake? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, imagine how many people had to get bit by a snake to be like, oh, well, that one with the stripes, you know, it's a deadly one. Which, I mean, it's tough, but it's also, you know, I don't want to say self-inflicted by the masses from where we've gotten all the information from, you know, like where we've gathered that from. So it's tough, but it is a process.
Have you had people come to you, whether or not they've had a recent injury, they went to the doctor or they went to physical therapy, and, you know, during the recovery process, they came to you? And can you speak on how GOATA has improved their situation more than anything else that they had previously tried?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one thing that is super unfortunate is that we are seeing so many increases in those catastrophic injuries, you know, the ACLs, the Achilles. I've worked with, you know, multiple ACL injuries, multiple ACLs on the same knee. I have a couple friends that have ruptured Achilles tendons, and what they've experienced when they go to physical therapy, like I did myself with my ankle. I mean, I didn't have any torn tendons, but it was a severe ankle sprain. So they'll sit you on a table and they'll give you, you know, these tests, or after they repair the ligament, they'll kind of rehab it in a way that you're not really moving it yet, or they're not paying too much attention to how you are moving when you do start to move again. So they kind of let you lay on that table, or they tell you to keep the foot elevated, keep the knee elevated. And from there, which immediately after surgery, you know, like once that repair is done, you might need some time to rest and recover that actual surgical replacement or surgical repair that was done. But once you start training and putting pressure onto that joint and seeing where that pressure is sitting, which is another thing that's so important with the foot placement, essentially, is seeing how that foot is pressurized. You know, if you're standing outside what we consider the columns, is just where the hips, knees, ankles, and feet, or hips, knees, shoulders, and toes are all stacked on top of one another. Right. If you were standing with your feet so far outside your base and outside of where that center mass is, you're automatically putting the pressure to the inside of those feet. And so, as we know, you know, the feet have arches, which arches aren't meant to collapse. It's a structure, and it's a support system that our bodies have developed, and evolutionary purposes have been, you know, pretty successful with making us the most elite athletes on the planet, essentially. So when you start to see these Achilles tendons, these ACLs start to tear, it's like, all right, well, like, where did we go wrong, or what happened over time when that would start to happen? So back to, I kind of got sidetracked, but back to the fact that I've seen I don't want to be overconfident, but everyone that I've worked with has seen some serious improvements in, like, whether it be, breaking down scar tissue, because if they did have that ACL repair and then went to a normal rehab where they're just kind of, again, sitting you on a table, it's not so much that they're working on, okay, how are we going to get you back into that athleticism? It's like some people, they'll tear their ACL and all of a sudden they're done playing contact sports for life. So that's one of the most dreadful things to hear as an athlete, obviously. But as far as, that goes, training the locomotion that GOATA does puts you, like, we have workouts and stuff that you'll be in a stationary position, but we're training the locomotive derivatives of the joint segments. And so we're going to work the hip capsule of that ball and socket with your foot. As some people, if you tear your Achilles, they're going to look at your foot, they're going to repair the Achilles. They're never going to look at how your foot is actually operating when you're moving. And, you tore that Achilles because of your hip and ankle relationship. So it's like where you're pressurizing the foot at a certain time in the locomotive phase that they don't really pay attention to. It's kind of what we call a cadaver science. It is legitimately that when they're studying, no one's ever studied live people before. That was kind of frowned upon, I guess, in history. So
dead people don't talk as much.
Dead people don't talk as much. They don't complain. They don't, So as far as that goes, it is different to be able to study a live human through video, and not so much of, let me just set this dead body on a table and then run an electric current through a single muscle. And that's where that isolation kind of comes in. It's like, okay, well, this muscle pulls and then this part of the body moves, so that must move that part of the body. Whereas we treat the body as one big picture or one well-oiled machine, where it's like your left foot's not operating right if your right hip and right shoulder aren't operating in that same synchronicity. And so that's what we call the singularity, is just getting all of the bones and all of the joints and all of the muscles in the body working in unison. So it's not like we don't really isolate an area of the body. We'll put it all together and treat it all in one through the locomotion.
Is there a way that you would, so you mentioned you don't isolate, but is there a way that you would kind of start someone if you are beginning them on this process and then make a progression from what you started them on?
Absolutely. So we have a pretty in-depth assessment system or assessment. It's kind of a few different modalities that have been very successful. So we'll start them off and we attack the low-hanging fruit, which is, what are the biggest things that need change? So if someone is, flat-footed, they can't be absorbing energy properly in that locomotion phase if they can't absorb that outside edge pressure onto their foot when they're moving forward. So something like that, or, someone who either may not have had an injury, like obviously we'd try and rehab that injury spot or injury location first to get that up to what we consider standard. Is just trying to get people moving again. But I would say attacking the low-hanging fruit in the sense of, if you're super front chain dominant, where if your hips are swayed way under your ribs, we want to get your hips behind your ribs first, or we want to straighten your feet out. We don't want your feet to be toes pointed out. We want your feet to be straight so that when your shin and ankle are moving around with your hip in that synchronicity, we're going to get that moving first before we even have you do anything else. We want you to be able to move efficiently in the patterns that we're seeing in the infants, in the super athletes, the 100-year-old people that are running marathons, the age groupers doing triathlons and stuff like that. So it is definitely imperative that you start where the biggest issues are, or the biggest issues lie.
Can you give me an example of like a specific exercise that you may do with a beginner that would recreate a functional movement pattern and get them started?
Yeah, I mean, as as simple as it could get is we have some tools and equipment pieces that help maybe get them to the outside edge of their foot. So we have slant boards that slant down towards the ground that will elevate that inside ankle bone by default. So we'll start there, and that's kind of a derivative of, if you're gonna locomote, we want your foot and ankle in the right placement. Or we're gonna work on what we consider a bow to a corner, which is the landing phase of the gait pattern to the releasing phase of the gait pattern. And by that I just mean obviously moving from foot to foot. Like I was saying earlier, we kind of the most reps we do every day is walking. And so if you're walking, if you don't walk correctly, how are you going to run correctly? And that's why we start with we start everything from the ground up. So if we're going to start on the ground, we're going to have you crawl before you walk, and we're going to make sure you're sitting on the ground, and which is what we get into the resting postures and resting positions and kind of substitutions to the chairs, to the desks, to the couches and whatnot. And from there, just take it quite literally one step at a time. Is we'll see how efficiently you can crawl and make sure the spinal engine is moving. You know what I mean? If you think about it, we got balls and sockets in our shoulders and hips.
Yeah. If
those aren't moving together properly, there's going to be stresses. There's going to be what we consider leaks in the energy system, where if energy isn't created or destroyed, we're going to have an energy system through our body where we need to be able to flow. And that's kind of becoming a big thing in exercise, is that flow state and that actual flowing pattern of fluidity. So from there, we just making sure really to get the athlete moving correctly, if it's an injury, we'll take care of the injury, or if it's someone that's an elderly, older person that hasn't maybe moved in his patterns in a long time, we'll start them off slow, attack the low-hanging fruit and start there.
So you mentioned this bow stance, and I've seen this before on your posts and on other GOATA related stuff. Comparing that in movement, especially let's say in like a sprint, obviously seems like that's something that has to be trained slower, just like you're saying, walking first before you start running. Can you find anything inherently wrong with cueing athletes to run in a way so that they have a neutral leg, like hip and knee drive, like triple flexion, if you will, focusing on that versus this bow stance, or the corners that you were mentioning, transitioning in this way and then having your leg lined up that way, because I feel like the triple extension type of method, especially for myself, not knowing anything about GOATA, that's kind of a standard that I had used for a while. So can you kind of break down if there's anything wrong with that type of pattern, from the GOATA mindset?
Honestly, the thing with the triple extension and even just flexion extension in general is they're linear patterns. And so when we say linear patterns, it's the straight line energy that we're talking about, which doesn't happen. Energy can't move in a straight line. It's got to spiral and wave. So when you're talking, whether it's like the Olympic lifts, like cleans and stuff like that, are a lot of triple extension. So for that forward locomotive gait pattern that GOATA is derived from and observed by, the difference of that is if we were in triple extension and that flexion extension pattern, we wouldn't have the rotation and I guess absorption that we have in our design. Our structure has the swivel joints and the hip joints, ball and socket with the ankle and the hip. And if those were the flexion extension, that's kind of what will deteriorate and cause, like myself, I experienced those repetitive stress injuries of the hip flexors. So when you're not really training those ball and sockets in those patterns that are respective of the actual structure itself, it can cause connective tissue entrenchments where it's tough. They're tough to get out of. But so with triple extension, the most time we see that is with the lifters, is with the Olympic lifters, whether it's powerlifting, Olympic lifting. When you start to locomote, it's that forward drive. So triple extension promotes what we call reverse movement of pulling from the ground, moving up and back. And when you're doing that in a forward locomotive pattern or a forward locomotive action or whatever you're doing, if you're chasing a ball down the field or if you're just running on a Sunday afternoon, when you're doing that, it promotes a front chain dominant individual, where that front chain dominance could lead to them coming in hard on the heel, because with the triple extension lifts, a lot of times, like you said, like they'll cue the heel drive and the weight in the heel, where if you start to do that when you're locomoting forward and training in that forward locomotion, you're not essentially creating that fluidity of energy passing back and forth. So that's where people experience the shin splints, or when they're running over a period of time, they'll start to feel the low back pain because the way that their spine is absorbing that pressure from hitting that heel on the ground rather than that soft outside edge of the foot. That's where it kind of gets dicey with, you see the athletes when they jam that heel on the ground and they're moving forward, if they're changing direction or something, that's where most oftentimes you'll see the heel hit the ground. And then from there, obviously the toe comes down, and then you got a planted foot where that pressure doesn't have that ability to move through the joint capsule and through that swivel of the ankle. And all of a sudden, boom, you're locked up. So that energy that can't be destroyed has to go somewhere. And what we've seen on the film with the injury mechanics is that energy goes down, hits that flat foot, and then bounces back up. Either if they're moving forward, it's back up to the knee, and that's when we see the ACL tears. Or if they're moving backwards, like Kevin Durant, when he went to go cross someone over, he jammed that heel in the ground and went to go make that crossover, and the Achilles blew out. So that's where we see, I used to be petrified of watching injuries, just because as an athlete, I was like, oh man, it hasn't happened to me yet. I'm lucky that I've gotten this far. But now that I understand the actual injury mechanics to the forward locomotive derivatives, it's become a lot, I don't want to say easier, because it's never easy watching injuries, but it's become a lot more understanding of like, all right, well, like this is happening a lot, where we're seeing these same patterns and injuries. And then you look at the guys that don't get hurt, and it's not the same pattern of how they're loading their structure, how they're loading the foot on impact, how they're doing certain things, even if it's just someone running straight forward. Like you could have someone that is running with an external rotation on the release of that stride, and that's when you see that hamstring up that fourth hamstring up under right at the base of the pelvis. That's when you'll see that get pulled a lot, is because that external rotation of the foot, rather than what we call a corner, is energy moving around a corner with your hips working in that gyroscopic pattern together. What you'll see is that hip will rotate out, that hamstring up in that top underneath the pelvis has slack in it, where if you're at top end running fast, that slack pulls. And that's where you see the pulled hamstrings. Pulled hamstring or even strained hamstring is a repetitive stress injury. It's not a catastrophic. It's not going to, end your career, so to speak, but it's the same patterns that we see as the ACL tears, as the Achilles tears, as, the pedal fractures in the foot and whatnot.
Do you train or present these methods or techniques differently from your field and court athletes to your powerlifters, or like strictly weight training individuals that you've worked with? Do you present the information or give it to them in a different way, or is it in general similar?
GOATA is just forward locomotion. So, I mean, whether like I've worked with powerlifters and they've seen benefits and increases in power and numbers and across the board. So we're always training to up level that forward locomotion engine, the locomotive engine, which that's hands down the biggest discrepancy between, like GOATA is just like another whatever, and then people that are lifting and saying like, no, like I got better at football when I started lifting, or I started jumping higher when I started squatting or something like that, which maybe you did over time, but you're putting yourself at risk. And so the lifting engine compared to the locomotive engine is that what we say reverse moving is because you're moving up and back, whether you're squatting with a bar on your back or whether you're picking something up from the ground. Whereas when you're locomoting, you're turning forward in that kind of rear wheel drive scenario where, so to answer your question, we really coach it the same way. It's if we train the locomotive, I mean, not so much whereas like a power lifter, if I had a competitive power lifter come to me and work with me, yeah, I would want him to be running well, but I'm more focused on, all right, what's your foot doing? Like, I know you're going to be squatting with your foot flat on the ground. You know, obviously powerlifters aren't going to be with their heels off the ground or squatting on their toes. So yeah, when they do that, I get them on the boards. We have like chucks that go under your heel to elevate the heel. So we'll train the same derivatives that we see in the locomotion, but because it's enhancing the overall durability of the structure itself, that squat max is going to go up. That deadlift is going to be able to be performed at a higher level, because when you're doing that, you're actually creating a hydrated tissue in the connective tissue segments. And that's why it's, you know, everyone talks about, oh, well, like, you guys don't lift. So like, how do you get bigger? Like, what if a guy is going into college, needs to gain weight, needs to get bigger, put on size, whatever. We've seen with our athletes that it's obviously gains are made in the kitchen. You know, everyone knows that. Everyone knows that. You know, whether it be the six pack or whether it be putting on 20 pounds in the off season. So from there, we train it so that we put the resistance on the athlete, and then when we see a power lifter come in, we'll have them train the GOATA principles. And from there, like I was saying, your body is actually enhancing its ability to whether it repair itself or just function at an optimal level. So that durability and that structural integrity that we train is going to up level the lifting engine. It's not just going to be like, I wouldn't just train it as if I'm working with a track athlete. I'm just going to train the GOATA principles, and you're going to see those benefits when you go back to your sport. And so it's not like we don't turn away weightlifters, you know what I mean? If anything, right, we're looking at weightlifters like, dude, you need this, or like, you know what I mean? Like, if you're going to be constantly training that lifting engine, that's kind of one of the main things is like, nobody, especially from my experience anyways, but a high school kid that loves to go in the gym and squat 400 pounds, which myself, I'm sure a lot of people that are going to hear this will feel the same way. It's tough to get rid of that mindset of like, I want to go in the gym and pump some iron and hit those numbers. You know what I mean? I have a target set that I want to hit. So it is different, but we attack it all the same way.
Yeah, I was feeling that today. I was going in doing my deadlifts, and I just because of my schedule, I don't get in the gym as often as I can. So when I hit the weight, I don't see like a huge decrease in my poundage, but you know, I had a max of like 315 for 5 that I could hit like comfortably with decent technique, and now I'm like trying to focus more on hitting the weight a little bit lighter, but just, being better with how I'm moving. So I can feel that mentality of just wanting to go in and get the numbers back up like how you used to and all that. So I want to get into how objections from people to GOATA and kind of like what you were starting to talk about a little bit, where people maybe on the outside don't understand it, or they have a mindset that was stuck one way for so long. I want to get into that, but there's one more question I want to ask. Can someone take GOATA techniques and integrate them into their training programs? Let's say if they're like a trainer like myself, or the strength and conditioning coach, can they take tips, like for example, or can they, like for example, use the wedge tool, or just essentially anything from this training methodology and implement it into their training without solely transforming themselves into a GOATA coach, or getting certified? Or like, can they basically take little bits and bolster their programming that way?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one thing I'm sure you've seen a lot of is, and myself, I've done it before, is like people that don't have the ankle mobility, they'll throw a weight under, or throw a plate or something under their heel. Yeah. So something like that, you can go a little bit more in depth and see, okay, well, where is the actual pressure in that foot? Because your heel could be elevated, and I mean, whether you have a GOATA chuck or just a flat plate that you're putting your foot up on, you still want to have that outside edge pressure to keep that ankle structure that's in its design that's going to function optimally. So, I mean, you could have your heels elevated and still be caving in your arches of your feet that are dropping your inside ankles. That is going to eventually, over time, whether it's competitive athlete or not, or someone that just plays recreationally, or someone that's going to have the situation like ourselves, that we're just in the gym, like we're not competitively playing sports anymore, but we want to function properly. So I would say, like, working on keeping the foot pressure correct, keeping the back strong. That's major, is the back chain dominance, is because we're a front chain dominant society due to all those external sources, or external I'm looking for that word, external
stimulants, something like that. Stimulants, just a bunch of voices from everyone else that is just trying to get their agendas across without any evidence, type of thing.
Yeah, right. And so yeah, exactly. It's as far as that goes, you could look at how, if you look into a little bit of how the body's structured, you know what I mean? It's like that linear pattern of passing the knee directly over the toes is going to take away from the function of that swivel joint and the ball and socket. Because when you do that, our ball and socket, the way we absorb pressure with our hips and ankles is to turn the knees out. When you're turning the knees out, when you absorb that pressure, you release the pressure by turning that knee back in. So a lot of times when you see that lifting engine, you see the knees go in, and then when they stand up, the knees go back out, because oftentimes they're either outside their base of those columns, or their toes are actually turned outwards. So you can look in. I mean, all the GOATA coaches and stuff have things on their Instagram where it's kind of like the cues of the straight foot, where the actual foot is meant to be pressurized. The hips behind the ribs, postural stuff, and essentially just when you train the forward locomotive derivative of how we're designed, like I said, that lifting engine is going to go up. That lifting engine strength and function is going to go up by default. So there are multiple ways that you could cue it as a coach that isn't necessarily either, whether you're not fully deep dive or like even convinced that GOATA is the way to do things, or you just kind of want to be like, all right, I just want my athletes to be safer. I don't really care about the actual performance of forward locomotion. If I'm gonna coach Betty Ann that's hasn't squatted or something in 20, 30 years, I'm going to make sure she's doing it right, type of thing.
Absolutely. You mentioned straight foot. Is that statically or in movement too? Because that's actually a cue that I give my athletes sometimes, like when they're landing or when they're moving laterally and stuff. I say, all right, try to keep your feet straight, and they actually do. So I believe, without coaching it maybe necessarily specifically, like they are like I do see that their feet become more straighter when they move. So I feel like they are unconsciously putting the pressure in the spots on the outside of their feet like that in order to keep that foot straight. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, we cue it by first, second toe straight, and that's just something we've seen on the film again. And YouTube, you can cut clips from all age groups of indigenous tribes down to just the kid running around in the backyard that hasn't had those external pressures of what's going to decode their body. So that innate security is the foot straight that has that inside ankle bone high because of that swivel joint. Like I said, I know I keep going back to that, but it is so imperative that as soon as that foot starts to come out, then the ankle starts to go with it, then the knee starts to go with it, and then all of a sudden you're standing on a foot that's turned out. So when you go to make that cut and make that pressurized, hard max neural drive impact, you're going to hit the ground. And chances are, if your toes are pointed out, that pressure is going to go straight to the inside edge of the foot. So keeping the foot straight is going to allow that ankle gyroscope to move, pass back and forth with those metatarsals in the foot way more efficiently than the alternative, which is the toes out. I mean, even when we make cuts, when we change the direction as athletes, we cue them to actually pigeon toe because we want the feet straight or turned in because of that release. When you're releasing that pattern of the locomotion, you're going to be flipping that heel away. So when we make cuts, say I wanted to make a cut, if I'm running at you and I wanted to cut to my left, your right, I'm going to pigeon toe that foot a little bit. I'm not going to, even though I'm stepping outside my column to change direction for that leverage in the movement, I'm not going to turn my foot out just to throw a little bit more of a fake, because that's when we see that inside ankle bone collapse, and then that's what happens with the ACL ruptures.
Got you. That's really helpful. And some of these cues that you've given me are very valuable to myself, and I feel like others out there, athletes or coaches that want to kind of up level. That's the term. So thanks so much for that. So kind of when I have been doing some research and, I actually listened to some people on another podcast talk about GOATA a little bit too. From what I can tell, any objections that come to it kind of come from the perspective of like, people see it as like something that's closed off in a way, which I feel like is kind of flawed, but because they're not necessarily focusing on the results and the evidence that's there. Maybe they feel like it's a lot to kind of dive into, and they maybe see all the lines, all the acronyms and stuff like that, and they get a little bit intimidated by it. But have you noticed any major objections to this type of programming, and what might some of those be?
Obviously the whole research and providing the evidence in the academia standpoint of like, oh, well, there's no research papers, or there's no article that I could read by a doctor that has said this. And that's why GOATA coaches are definitely headstrong. It's one of those things where, like myself, 99% of these coaches had injuries that they were tremendously affected by. And so we definitely are confident in the fact that once we start training this way, we start feeling a certain way. So when someone comes to us and says, well, that doesn't work, you know what I mean? Like there's nothing to prove that. Then we say, okay, well, like, let's look at the video. Let's watch the video of the ACL tear. And if you can find a single ACL tear that's in the same pattern of inside ankle bone high, straight foot that the indigenous tribe is running in, or that someone in the NFL that never gets hurt, or any sport really. I refer to football as much as because that's what I played, but
yeah,
a lot of times they kind of pull back from that, and they're like, oh, well, there's no proof of that. You know what I mean? Like there's no proof where that's going to be true. So there's that. There's the evidence thing where we just say, hey, let's watch the film. Or, one thing I get a lot, because I came from NESP and they're a West Side barbell gym, and they love to get big and put on weight, which again, I'm all for the gaining size and strength through working out. And so what I would say is, you can get big. I mean, it's not going to be the same way as, squatting 400 pounds and getting the big muscles. We focus on the connective tissue. So I'm going to put a couple hundred pounds on a sled and have you push or pull that around, which is going to train the forward locomotion. However, it's just not going to be the traditional squat. It's not going to be the traditional deadlifts. So that's one thing I get, is like, you can't get bigger and be GOATA. And to that, I mean, there's the landmine press that we use, which you can train that locomotive derivative. You can train the locomotive derivative on the Henny press, which is essentially kind of like a jammer off of a rack that you can train a non-linear pattern with a free moving spine. And so there are a lot of ways to be able to get those functions in, where you'll get cooked up and you'll start to, if you eat right, again, gaining size comes from the kitchen, but that fuel for your body is what is more important than just the actual performance of that specific workout. So between the evidence, the gaining size portion of it's tough, because what people say, like I don't want to say the naysayers, but people that are very, I mean, one of my best friends was severely like caught when I was like, yeah, man, like I don't really lift weights anymore. And he's like, dude, what? Like you've been lifting weights your whole life. Like, and I was a high functioning person that was facing injuries, but I was pretty athletic. So no one wants to believe that when I start to say, oh, like I feel so much better and I'm more functional than when I was lifting weights. And so that's kind of the two big ones that we get as GOATA coaches.
Okay. That makes sense. But we talked a little bit in the beginning about the importance of keeping an open mind, and I just find that valuable for myself. And if you don't have an open mind, you maybe get stuck in a lot of places and don't necessarily know it. So I think that finding a way to appreciate something, even if you don't understand it, like, just, I'm sure that you obviously as a person, you're very knowledgeable, but you will sit and you'll break it down, you'll explain it to a person, and other coaches like you will do the same thing. So that's, I feel like, is the biggest thing that's going to help those people kind of come to a point where they can have their minds opened and start to understand it a little bit better. So.
Right. And I mean, like you said, the open-mindedness is, you kind of have to, the person that thinks they know everything is hurting them. It's hurting themselves. They're putting a box, and they're encasing their own capability to, this is what I know, and that's what I'm going to go with. Whereas people like myself and like you reached out and said, hey, like, this looks pretty cool. And like, obviously, like, we've been weightlifters our whole life. So coming from that standpoint and opening to be like, well, let's just find out about it. Let's just look into it, do a little studying. And I'm someone that will, every single time I ever do something, I'll experiment on myself before I would prescribe it to an athlete I'm training or tell someone else to give it a try. I'm going to do it for myself because I want to know.
Right.
Like, I wouldn't just suggest you to go and do a certain thing that I either don't know is going to either positively or negatively affect you, but also that I've never done, to know that it's going to positively affect me or negatively affect me. And so it's like that self-exploration is so crucial just to learning. And that goes way beyond any type of physical training. That goes, if you don't get out of your comfort zone, you're never going to take that step into the world of, curiosity, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. That's a little bit what this podcast is about for me. Just building my knowledge base, helping others build their knowledge base, and getting out of my own comfort zone, because I find that that's a hard thing to do. And it's for everyone, it's kind of hard. So yeah, man, I mean, big props to you. Big props to everyone that delivers GOATA and makes it consumable for others. Keep it pushing, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're passionate about it. That's the best way to put it, is we're passionate about it. A lot of people will kind of be like, wow, like, GOATA coach is an asshole, like, or he's real, like, we're mean or something, you know what I mean? And so from there, what happens is, like, no, we're passionate. Like, I want you to be able to play play basketball with your 15-year-old son in 20 years, 30 years, you know what I mean? Like, I want you to be able to get out there and do those things as an athlete, whether you're a high school athlete or younger, you know, middle school kids in their growth play stages. I want them to be at their peak optimization throughout their whole gradual evolution of life. Like, I don't want there to ever be like, damn, like, I was a real good athlete in high school and then it just kind of like trickled off. Like, I want to be able to have that kid say, like, yeah, like, I played basketball in college and played basketball in high school, and then continue to, whether it's recreational or stay competitive with it, is to just move forward and be like, yeah, like, now I play a men's league and I drop 30 points a game. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want there to be a cap on when people are supposed to expect to not play anymore. You know what I mean? That's the worst thing to me, is like I don't want to hear that. Like, I don't want to hear that people are like, oh, well, like, I'm getting old. Like, you know, my back hurts. Like, my knees hurt sometimes. So it's hard to listen to that, because obviously I don't play competitively anymore. I try and get out and shoot hoops, do as much as I can. But it's just, I realize how much I could have improved myself at a younger age, whereas now I found GOATA at a point in my life where, like I said, I'm not playing competitively anymore. So I always had the passion. I mean, I was waking kids up in my high school. I was waking my friends up, walking in their house at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning over the summertime, and waking them up, like, dude, like, let's get up. We're going to the gym, bro. Like, come on. And I kind of use that drive and that hustle to, I just want to make sure athletes are performing at, you know, if you love playing the game, you should love everything about playing the game. And that goes into the preparation, that goes into the training for yourself, for your body, that's going to allow you to play that game for the length of however you're alive. You know what I mean? Like, there's 70, 80-year-old indigenous tribe members or hunter-gatherers that are going out on 20, 30, 40-mile hunts and bringing food back to their tribes. Like, I want you to, like I just said, like, I want you to be out there with your son and daughter and play basketball, whether it's basketball, whether it's soccer, whether it's even just throwing. Like my dad he threw out his shoulder when he was younger, so we didn't have the opportunity to really have that father-son, like, let's go play catch. You know what I mean? Like day in, day out. And so those types of things, it's sad to see, because there is so much potential in the human body, and that optimization of those functions are just, they're either, you know, some people aren't interested in the fitness and I guess training that functionality, which, okay, that's fine. Like, if that's not your cup of tea, that's your cup of coffee, you know, rather than, you know what I mean? So, it gets tough, but it's why a lot of us are passionate about it. And that's not to say that coaches that aren't coaching GOATA aren't passionate. It's just, maybe they haven't either. Maybe they're not interested. Maybe they're coaching powerlifters. Maybe they're coaching people that want to get better at powerlifting, but they have to have that passion behind it.
Exactly, man. Well, thank you for having that passion, right? Keep rocking it. And I will do the same myself. Want to wrap things up. Can you take a second and, let people know where they can find more information if they're interested, plug where they can find you and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, as far as GOATA goes, if you Google GOATA movement systems or GOATAcoaching.com, that'll bring you to a site where you can find GOATA coaches in your area. My Instagram handle is Beantown, BEAHN town. And you can go there. You can go to GOATA Loco or GLS Training, which are the godfathers of the GOATA movement systems. Anyone who's interested in the certification process and how that works can reach out to Cody GOATA or Cody_GOATA on Instagram. But yeah, really, we all support each other in the GOATA world. So all of our coaches are reposting. We're reposting each other all the time. You know what I mean? Everyone's got a different network of followers. So the more we can get it out there to see things or have people see our content, the better it's going to be for the masses. We're not just trying to blow GOATA out of above everyone else. We want everyone in the world to experience their biggest potential, their highest performance and peak performance of themselves. And so you reach out to me, I'll point you in the direction. I tag a lot of the coaches and stuff that I post, as do a lot of others. So from there, I mean, I would just say, if you Google GOATA and go onto the website, it'll kind of break it down for you and then get you to that GOATA coaching map where it'll show you. I mean, I think there's over 150 coaches now worldwide. So in the US, it'll have a map. You guys can find where coaches are near your city or the closest one to you. We have an app that we coach virtually on, so that's set up. But yeah, I would say that'd be the best place to start.
All right, man. Well, again, thank you so much for coming out on the podcast, spreading the love, spreading the knowledge. Out here, we spend each day like we're living out one giant set, and we got to put in the reps to get the results. So you've done that, and I'm working on that, and the people that we try to help are doing the same. So appreciate you, man. All right.
Greg, I appreciate you. Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
All right.